Hi everyone, welcome to another segment of Inspire Movement. Today we continue with our series entitled Servanthood, and we have the great pleasure of being today with Mr. Eric Gray, which is the Executive Director for the Christian Service Center for Central Florida. He is a 25-year veteran of the nonprofit sector, a strong advocate for Orlando community issues, which are things like community health, economics, poverty, and homelessness. I'm not going to steal a lot of the thunder as we get into our interview, but I'm going to turn our attention now to Mr. Eric Gray. Thank you so much, sir.
No, thanks for coming over.
For giving us this opportunity. Yeah. I also have to thank Mr. Dr. Thomas Breyer, who was the person that synced me up with you. I'm so very glad that we're here and just perusing the grounds today. Not having known of the facility before, I'm already very taken by what you guys are doing. And just wanted to give you a quick opportunity to give us any personal background or intro to anybody watching that may not know you.
Oh, sure. So I'm married to my high school sweetheart, Heather. We both grew up in the Tampa area, went to Tampa Chamberlain High School, and we have 4 great kids. And they are very active in school. We have 2 in high school, 1 in middle school, and 1 in elementary school right now. So lots of sports, lots of activities, even with all the craziness that's been going on. And I've got a soccer game tonight that we're going to at Boone High School.
Fantastic.
And we have, Heather and I have been in our careers sort of parallel. Coming out of college at the University of Florida, we both went to graduate school in Kentucky, and she is an occupational therapist, owns a private practice that focuses on pediatric, occupational, physical, and behavioral therapy. And while she's been doing that, I've been working in the nonprofit sector this whole time and have had opportunity to work with some really great organizations and have been really blessed to be able to land here at the Christian Service Center more recently.
Okay, so I'd like to expound on that journey a little bit.
Sure.
In briefing through your biography, I know obviously your experience with telecommunications and business administration in your time with University of Florida. Mm-hmm. In University of Kentucky, then you did your master's in public administration. Tell us a little bit about that transition, I guess, from your bachelor's to your master's degree, where you more specifically now decided, okay, my career path is the nonprofit sector.
So when I was at the University of Florida, I was in the Gator Marching Band for 4 years, and it was a very all-consuming exercise, particularly because my final 2 years I was the drum major for the marching band. And so being a leader of what was at the time the largest student organization on campus was a big deal. The only reason I share that is that I was also involved with my Methodist student ministry, the Wesley ministry there, and involved with a choir that we had at that campus that got to tour around, which sounds kind of boring when you say it out loud, but the Maranatha choir was actually a huge part of our, my wife and I's experience in college, because we would travel over the Christmas holiday for a week and over the summer for a week with this group, and it was just a lot of fun. And then I got involved with a third organization that was a fundraising event for the Children's Miracle Network at Shands Children's Hospital, and the event's called Dance Marathon. It's held at hundreds of universities around the country, but at the time it was only held at Penn State University and Northwestern, and this is back in 1995, and the Children's Miracle Network wanted to pioneer this or pilot it at 5 universities in the United States, and the University of Florida was one of them. Mm-hmm. So my wife and I participated, and we weren't married at the time, but we participated as dancers in this event, and it was 32 hours awake and on your feet, no sleeping, no sitting, no kidding, for this entire event. And we raised, as a group, about 115 people, raised about $16,000 for the Children's Miracle Network. And the event was, it was amazing in some ways, and it was terrible in others. People went to a lot of effort to try to plan it, but it was excruciatingly painful for the students who participated in it. So I got very frustrated with the event, and for whatever reason, it just occupied all of my thinking for that entire semester afterwards, thinking this could have been planned so much better. And so I applied to be on the planning committee for it after my sophomore year, got accepted, and then was on the planning committee during my junior year, and then my senior year I was selected as the overall director for this program. That year we went to the football national championship with the Gator Band, mm-hmm. and won, and it was a big deal. And my choir I was directing that choir at the time, but the thing that consumed me the most was the Dance Marathon program. And I was putting in 80 hours a week on top of everything else, just working on this program. And I loved it. And we had an amazing experience. We raised $62,000 in 1997 and moved the event to the O'Connell Center, which is where the basketball team plays. That event today, after 25 years of the event going on, is now the largest student event on campus at the University of Florida. It's larger than Gator Growl, which used to be the big event there. It raises well over $1 million a year for the Children's Miracle Network. And I got to be a part of pioneering that from the beginning. But it never occurred to me, not even once, that I might go into the nonprofit sector as a career. I was a television major, and I didn't plan on being on TV. I was going to be in the management side.
Right.
So that was my first job out of school, was selling television advertising, because that's how you start off in management.
Okay.
And then I got recruited to work at a PBS station. And the public broadcasting station was recruiting me to do basically the same thing. They just call it underwriting as opposed to commercial advertising.
Right.
But that got me into the nonprofit sector officially. And then I realized, this is amazing. I love this. And all that passion that I had my whole last 3 years of college working on the dance marathon all came back out again when I was working for PBS. And it was sort of a no-brainer. I was like, oh, this is what I want to do forever. I want to run a nonprofit. So it just never clicked while I was in school that you could do that as a profession. Nobody ever talked to me about that was a possibility. And I never asked. And so I got hooked in the nonprofit sector and have just had jobs in this sector ever since. And then when I was in Kentucky for grad school, my wife and I, we moved out there for my wife's grad school. I was working at PBS there and decided to go back and get my master's degree in nonprofit management while we were there. And so that's kind of how that journey took hold.
And now having that sort of yearning to be in the nonprofit sector already cemented through your experience with PBS.
Yes, but if it hadn't been for the experience with the dance marathon, I never would have gone through into the nonprofit sector as work. My family had been involved with different charitable activities here and there. My mom was president of our PTA for 13 consecutive years while all my brothers and sisters were in school. We sold wrapping paper for the marching band, all that kind of stuff, but it wasn't really until the dance marathon program as a student that I got fully invested in the nonprofit sector as a business. And I can tell you that hundreds, if not thousands of students all over the United States have had the same experience that I had and have spun off into careers in the nonprofit sector because of their work on the Dance Marathon program, because it is a very comprehensive special event that takes a full year to plan. Mm-hmm. And so you get into nonprofit finance, board management, fundraising, corporate sponsorship. I mean, you touch on everything. Mm-hmm. And a lot of students have taken that experience and gone on and worked in the nonprofit sector as a result. And they do it here at the University of Central Florida. And I got to attend the very first UCF Dance Marathon as a senior at Florida. It was their first year here, and we came down as sort of advisors just for a day. And it's so neat to see that program, they call it Nighthon, to see that continue on to this day. And it's hugely successful here at the University of Central Florida too.
One of the fascinating things I love about these interviews is I'm a graduate of University of Central Florida and I was completely unaware.
Yeah.
But fascinating story. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So I'd like to touch on maybe as an established leader of this organization and prior organizations, who are some of the folks that I guess mentored you or in some way, shape, or form set an example for you to follow, and why?
So I sometimes refer to my mentors as sort of my superpower. And a lot of times people will say, what's your superpower? What makes you special? What is your special gift? To me, the special thing that I've had in my life was a series of dozens of mentors, guides, leaders, people who've just set good examples. And they kind of fall into two categories. People that were really leaders by example, quiet in their process, but people you could look up to, and people who've actually given me vocal instruction on things. And sometimes those areas cross over. The most significant mentor in my life from a leadership by example standpoint would have been my maternal grandmother who passed away this year, unfortunately, but she was such a quiet presence in a leadership role in our family. She was truly the matriarch of this huge family unit and was valedictorian for her little tiny high school in the Panhandle, but was just able to show everybody that by showing up
Right.
you know, that you are a leader. And I think the idea that 90% of success is showing up is something that, you know, I think it's an old Andy Warhol quote or something, but she really embodied that. And she just was at everything. And as a result of her doing that, my parents were the same way. My parents have attended everything I've ever done. I mean, they still come to events that I do, and they live in Tampa, and they drive over when we have fundraising events. They show up to everything. And that idea of sometimes just getting out of bed and showing up is among the best things you can do. So I've had a lot of mentors along those lines, people who are just quietly positive and reassuring, never have a bad word to say about anybody. I aspire to that. I still do my share of complaining and moaning about stuff, and I've not achieved that level of quiet stability, but I strive to that. But then I've had a lot of other people who have really taken time to give very special instruction. My very first boss in my very first nonprofit job at PBS in Kentucky was a guy named Jim McDaniel. And Jim had previously been the development director for the Sierra Club at a national level, and he sort of retired to Kentucky to take care of his family. And I got very lucky to work for somebody who was so talented. And the thing about Jim was he was willing to tell you anything you wanted to know and walk you through it and give you instruction. Why do we do direct mail this way? Why do we do special events this way? But he was also this incredibly positive person all the time, to a level that I don't even know how he maintained it. It's just always this effervescent personality. And so I aspire to that too, but have never been able to attain that. And I've had a lot of people who've been able to give that type of instruction to me over the years. Bosses who were really invaluable, people that I have enjoyed working with, and some that I didn't enjoy working with, but were still very particular in their instruction and how they said, okay, here's how you do this, here's how you do that. And I don't think it was until a little bit later in life, really in the last couple of years, that I realized not everybody gets that.
Right.
And I think I've gotten really lucky to have this army of people who, for whatever reason, saw something in me that said, I'm going to take that time to actually explain this to this person. It might have been because I was doing it so badly that they felt like they had to, but either way, I'm very appreciative of it because I'm able to turn around and teach in a lot of other ways. Now, the unfortunate thing is a lot of my staff have to listen to that all the time, and they get really tired of it. And a lot of my children really hate listening to it all the time. But I'm
sure in the long run they appreciate the
yes,
effort.
in 50 years they're going to love it, and they'll be talking to you about this, that time. But now it's a really painful experience for them. But in the meantime, I want to be able to pass along whatever wisdom has been passed along to me, because people really took a lot of effort and time out of their schedule to do that with me over the years.
And it's so critically important to have those figureheads in our lives to steer us in a direction that sometimes we don't even know that we actually aspire to be, maybe where they're at or in some of the spaces that they've lived in previously, but they kind of steer us in the right direction.
I've had a couple people in my life where I could pinpoint them and say, that's who I want to be when I grow up. And I don't know that everybody has that. Yeah. There's a guy here in town named Tommy Beck, another gentleman named Randy Rush, both gentlemen about the same age as my father. And when I look at Randy or Tommy or even my dad, Harry, you can say, that's who I want to be when I grow up. And they're all leading very different, very quiet, successful lives. And there's a common thread between them, which is they don't boast about it. They just do it. They're happy. They're hardworking. And I think, well, that's what I want to do. And to have that role model to be able to follow, invaluable. I'm very lucky to have had that.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. So very important. And for giving it forward as well, or paying it forward. So we find ourselves at the Christian Service Center. As I understand it, you've been here for a number of months, right?
Yeah.
Tell us why you decided that this is the organization that you wanted to take that next step to. And for those folks possibly watching this now that are unawares as to what the Christian Service Center provides as a service and what the overriding mission is, can you expound a little bit on that as well? Sure.
So I think my presence here is sort of just luck and timing. The longtime executive director, Robert Stewart, who is also a sitting commissioner on the city council here in the city of Orlando, he retired after 25 years, and we knew each other. We're not intimately well, but we knew each other because it's a small community.
Right.
And when I'd had a chance to interact with him about this time last year, and he mentioned, hey, I'm considering retiring. And he didn't really push anything, he just mentioned it. But I knew he was sort of saying, if you're interested, you ought to at least consider it. And I think he probably said that to dozens of people, right? Just to make sure that somebody was in play to take over this good work, because he spent a good part of his life leading this organization.
Important work.
Yes, and I applied. I just applied through a normal process of posting that they had online, and as it turned out, I think I was the first person to apply, and I went through a normal interview process with the board of directors. They interviewed a bunch of people, and it got down. I did a second interview. It was just a very normal process, and I was selected, and feel very lucky to have been selected. The board of directors here is incredibly committed to the organization. It's a small but mighty group of people that have been very engaged for a very long time, and they took very seriously the responsibility of replacing Robert. So,
sorry to interrupt you, but I believe you said 49 years running.
Yeah, so this organization started in 1971, and that's the same year that the Magic Kingdom opened, and that's not a coincidence. So what happened when Magic Kingdom opened, there was a flood of people all over the country, really over the world, who moved to Central Florida for what they thought was sort of a gold rush of jobs. It turned out that there wasn't, and the jobs weren't as plentiful as I think people thought they might be. And so when you had all these people that came here, not all of them had a way to get home. And there weren't as many social service outlets as there are today. And so the churches ended up taking the brunt on literally their doorsteps of people who needed assistance. There were 6 downtown churches that said, listen, we cannot do this separately. Let's get together. So they pooled some of their resources, they hired some professionals, and started this organization they call the Christian Service Center. And the idea was to help people in need where they were at that moment and the best they could. That really hasn't changed in 49 years. This organization's mission is truly just trying to help people in need. If anything that we've transitioned over time is that we've become more advanced in our process about trying to get people off the carousel of chaos that is poverty and homelessness. We're not trying to just serve and feed people and clothe people, but we're trying to get them out of this system and into a more permanent place of contentment and stability. But that's been going on for 49 years. Our 50th anniversary is in 2021, and we've got just an incredible number of people that are engaged with this organization historically. I feel very fortunate to be here at this time. I think I'm the 4th executive director in their entire history.
In 49 years.
In 49 years, yeah. So it's a real blessing to have been selected. It's a little bit of a burden in the sense that I have a lot to live up to. Robert Stewart, if you don't know him, is a real presence in this community, and he still comes by. He was here today, but he dropped off gift cards today to help families in need. So it's just there's a lot to live up to with this organization, but that's okay. I'd rather it be that level of burden as opposed to having to dig out of problems and challenges that were because of other organizations struggle with lots of things, corruption and just complacency and apathy, and that's not the case here. Here we have like this really high bar that we have to achieve,
right. And
what we're trying to do now is exist within a network of other agencies in the community that are also doing really great work, and make sure that we are all working towards the same end, which is getting people into housing, into jobs, or into medical care if they're not able to work, so that they're in a place of stability, out of poverty, to a place of self-sufficiency, so we can lower the overall amount of pain going on in the community right now, and really just try to, I like to say, we're trying to, by lifting people kind of at the bottom of the socioeconomic spectrum, we're sort of like a rising tide raising all ships, and
absolutely.
That's my belief, at least.
Absolutely. So while maybe the burden, as you mentioned, of having to live up to a certain standard, if you will, that Mr. Stewart left behind, is a lighter burden than some other organizations, like you mentioned, or nonprofit organizations with corruption and things like that. You certainly have a global sort of burden going on right now with this global pandemic that you are, I'm assuming, having to deal with and cope with on an everyday basis just to function.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on, I guess, maybe some of the issues that you are experiencing right now, Obviously, I'm presuming that the need for your services is ever growing because of this COVID-19 pandemic.
Yeah.
But also the delivery of services is ever more challenging. So I think certainly you are in that trial by fire, I would assume, in terms of having to deal with all of this right now. Can you elaborate on that aspect of
so the community is struggling at a whole series of levels, and Orlando in some ways is no different than the rest of the country, but there are a couple of specific issues in Central Florida. And while I know your program isn't limited to only people here,
Right.
this is where we sit. Orange and Osceola County have the highest unemployment rate in the state of all 67 counties right now. That is not changing. It's the unemployment rate is not going down very quickly. We still have layoffs happening at multiple different industries in the community. And that's on top of what was already a burdensome reality that 21% of the employment sector in this community is service-based, and that's second only to Las Vegas. But more importantly is only 4% of jobs in this community are manufacturing-based. And when you don't have a strong manufacturing sector, it's harder to spin off other business. It's harder to grow out of a recession. It really makes it hard for any type of improvement in the community to take place. We also are burdened with the reality that there are very few Fortune 500 companies that are headquartered in our area. In fact, I'm only aware of one, and that's Tupperware. And when you don't have the CEOs for major industry living in these communities, their philanthropy at a corporate level tends to go to where they live.
Right.
And that's a burden in this community as well, that corporate giving is as strong as the local decision makers can make it, but there's limits to what they're able to do when their boss and their boss's boss don't live here. And so there's a lot of, not to pick on Disney, but Disney, for example, a lot of their philanthropy shows up in Anaheim because that's where a lot of their headquarters folks live. They do the best they can here, but there's only so much you can do when the shareholders and the CEOs and the VPs all live in other communities.
Right.
We struggle with all of those realities before the pandemic. And on top of all of that, the most significant issue is that Orlando has very depressed incomes. So we have a very low individual median wage. In fact, we have the lowest individual median wage of any major city in the United States. So median income for a single individual like you or I is right now around $31,000. So half the community earns more than that, half the community less than that. And when you are dealing with depressed wages in the community, you're going to struggle with lots of other things when a recession, or in this case a pandemic, hits. So homelessness, which was already sort of a significant factor in the community at horrific levels, is just going to get worse. Hunger issues is just going to get worse. Housing issues are going to get worse. And what we're really all very frightened about is what happens when the federal eviction moratorium ends and people end up on the streets. And that leads to people having to do other things to make money. So you're going to see increases in sex trafficking, prostitution. You're going to see increases in drug use. You're going to see increases in the crime rate. And you're going to see increases, probably most significantly, in domestic violence. And those are all areas that have a very direct tie to the economy of a community. And so that's the part that's really horrifying right now. And we're trying to ramp up everything we can as fast as we can to address that. And our best way of doing that is by partnering with other agencies who are already doing good work, because I think we can be more impactful together. That's I think the best thing we can do overall.
So for folks watching this right now who live in Central Florida, as I do, what's your call to action for us?
So I think the most important thing is for people to be informed. And I'm a big advocate of journalism. I think that we as a community have multiple different journalism enterprises, television stations, radio stations. The most significant is the Orlando Sentinel. They have the most significant slate of journalists in the community, and they're struggling right now. They just are no longer at their downtown location. All their reporters are working from their homes. They are going through major changes with that organization, and I think just like a lot of nonprofits in the community, I think the Sentinel needs our support, because without journalism, you get rid of the checks and balances on crime and corruption and political issues and other corporations that might not always have the right intentions, and they are the checks and balances process more than any other. So I think subscribing and being a subscriber to the Orlando Sentinel is something that people should do, not just because of the news content and hey, it's nice to get the paper on your driveway or whatever, but because I think it actually helps improve the community. And the more robust your journalism enterprise, the more robust the community. The second thing is that you got to get back out and volunteer. Volunteerism rates in the United States have plummeted by 2/3 over this pandemic. We are seeing the same thing here. Our volunteerism rates are 1/3 of what they were 9 months ago. And so people that have the ability to get out and volunteer, as soon as they're able to do that, need to get back out and volunteer. And if you were a volunteer before, keep doing it. If you weren't ever before, you need to do it now. Volunteerism in Orlando was important before. It's going to be important again. It's critically important now. And we need people getting out in the world and volunteering, because that's the one strategic advantage a not-for-profit organization has, is volunteerism. You don't volunteer for banks or law firms.
Right.
And so if we're not using volunteers, we're not performing correctly. And right now I need volunteers desperately to participate, whether it's serving lunch or helping out in the office or serving on a committee or serving on our board. All of those roles are really important to the organization right now. And then people are going to have to dig in their pocketbooks and give to the organizations that they think are doing good work. We are seeing a decline in corporate giving. We're seeing an increase from foundations to try to match and sort of make up the difference. But individual giving is sort of stayed plateaued. And major donors are trying to dig into their pockets deeper, but it's not able to make up sometimes the impact from mid-level and smaller donors who just aren't able to right now because of the economic impact. Yeah. So if you have the means to contribute, now's the time to start contributing. I think all through 2021, it's going to take the entire year for people to get back to a place of stability again. And now's the time for people to really dig deep in their pockets and give to as many different organizations as they possibly can.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. And it's a call to action for us all, myself included. We can all do a little bit more. So certainly through our time and whatever financial means that we have. I'd like to talk a little bit about your specific experience with your prior organization, the United Against Poverty in Central Florida. Tell us a little bit about that experience. We were there for, I believe, 7 years, right? Just some major takeaways, things that you're most proud of during your tenure there. And some of those tangible outcomes that you can say, hey, we did this.
So really lucky to have gotten that job as well. A gentleman named Austin Hunt hired me. He was one of the founders of the organization and hired me to come in and run the Orlando operation. And United Against Poverty has operations in Vero Beach, Fort Pierce, and Orlando. And what's really unique about that organization is that they run a member share grocery program. It's very unique in the United States, where qualified members can go in and shop for food, just like any other grocery store, but the food is about 1/3 of the cost of what you get at another organization or at a commercial store. And that accessibility to sort of a fundamental need like food, it really helps take the burden off a lot of families. So in Orlando, United Against Poverty has somewhere in the neighborhood of 30,000 members that are part of that grocery program. Membership is free, but you have to qualify based on your household income.
Right.
So if your income is at or below double the U.S. poverty level, then you would qualify to shop there, and that's a significant portion of the community. So they provide a really, really unique service that takes just a little bit of the burden off of everyday working families. That sometimes that's all it takes is the difference between making the rent and not making the rent can be just a couple of bucks, and that is a big part of what United Against Poverty is doing. On top of that, over the years that I was there, I can't take credit for any of it, but the team of people that worked there were able to develop programs that helped to take people who are in poverty and lift them out of poverty to a place of self-sufficiency where they no longer needed any government assistance. And so they developed a really neat program that was really developing people's emotional intelligence skills. So they were helping people get stabilized physically, food, clothing, shelter, but also helping them stabilize emotionally. And so they developed a wonderful program there that we got the privilege of implementing over the last, I guess, 5 years or so. And that program started off the first year in 2015, I think it was. I think we helped lift 2 people out of poverty. I think the next year it was like 3 people. This year they will lift over 100 people out of poverty. And very proud of that work, but I can't take any credit for it. That was hundreds of people that are involved in that process, and many of that I worked with still there, still actively working on the process of helping to lift people out of poverty actively. It's run in Orlando by a phenomenal woman named Nancy Robinson, who is a former school board member here and had been on the original board of directors for the agency when it started, and sort of came back into the fold after her school board service, and has now taken on a leadership role there that I think is going to really take United Against Poverty to the next level. And I think the next level, you'll see it in other communities like Tampa and Jacksonville, Miami. I think that's where they're headed over time. It may take a couple of years, particularly with the pandemic, because it's a very, very difficult model to run. Truly nothing else like it in the United States. I mean, it's very, very unique.
I think I've shared in one of our previous interviews how myself and my family could have benefited so greatly when we first came to Florida in 1991 from such assistantship, because there wasn't that sort of social network to fall on, and we were definitely below the poverty line. It's tough. It's tough to overcome that, and it's just great work that organization is doing to lift folks from what seems like drowning waters. Really.
Yeah, it's very difficult, but they're doing a great job. I hated to leave the organization, but after 7 years, having this opportunity to come to and having really good people in place that I knew would take over without missing a beat, it wasn't a difficult decision, but it's always tough to leave any place where you really heavily invested in anything.
All right, so I'd like to start by talking a little bit more, expanding on collaborative partnerships. Yeah. You've obviously, with your extensive career, had the experience of collaborating with folks not only within the community or the community at large, but also different government entities, as well as other nonprofit organizations for a common goal.
Yeah.
So I'd like for you to expound on a little bit, for anybody watching who's an aspiring student possibly, looking for a vocation in the nonprofit sector, maybe some tips or some lessons learned that you can share with them as to how to effectively do that.
So I actually could tell you the moment where partnerships sort of became really apparent to me, like as an absolute necessity. There was a time when I very first started at United Against Poverty, where I was helping this woman into her car with her groceries, and she really didn't want the help, but she had a child with her who was struggling with autism, and this little girl was just creating all kinds of ruckus, and so I offered to help push the cart to her car. So she popped the hatchback on her car, and sort of body blocked me from wanting to help, and said, "No, that's fine, I got it." And I was going to just walk away, except the little girl ran off, and so the woman had to go chase her just a few feet. So then I went and said, "I've got to start loading the groceries in the car," except I realized it's not her car, it's her living room. She's got a sleeping bag and got a cooler, and they're living in this car. And she looked like she had just come from an office, like a job at a law firm. And I totally blew it. I'm supposed to know what to do in those situations, and I didn't say anything. I just got the stuff in the car. She was embarrassed. I was embarrassed. She left, and I was standing in the parking lot with my thumb up my ass and had no idea what I was supposed to do. So I got really frustrated in that moment. I think there was a whole series of things that had happened that week that it really left me very frustrated with the level of severity and need in the community. And so what I really decided at that point was, there's no way we can do this work on this campus and expect to really make a dent if we're only doing it by ourselves. You have to work with other agencies. And so I really leaned into finding ways to partner with other organizations. I didn't even really care what they were doing. I mean, if you had anything going that was even remotely close to the stuff we were doing, I wanted to work with you and find any way we could just bend over backwards to work with you. And that strategy seems to have worked. And it's been built off of nothing but frustration, but it seems to be working. And that's what we're doing here at the Christian Service Center. We just flung open our doors and said, we want to work with anybody that was willing to come here. And while there's no silver linings with the global pandemic, there have been some opportunities presented because some of these other agencies ended up homeless themselves and had nowhere to go to do service. So organizations like Straight Street Ministry, which does a daily feeding program, they're literally setting up outside as we're sitting here talking. They were removed from their original location because of the pandemic, and so they were looking for a place to go, and we said, come on, let's do it. Right. And we have 6 agencies like that that are working on our campus now. What I would say to either young professionals or students that are getting engaged with this, you can't do this work by yourself. And I don't know that this is necessarily unique to the nonprofit sector or even to the social service sector, but if you are finding yourself behind your desk a lot and not outside the building, you are doing it wrong. What I would normally say is you got to go to as many rubber chicken lunches as you can, and you go to as many Chamber of Commerce meetings as you can, be out and about in the community everywhere you can. That doesn't work right now, but it will again. And anytime you can network and communicate with others, learning about what they do and just making those connections and building those relationships. To a lot of young people, I think networking takes on a really negative tone because they think it's all about who you know and it's not fair and all this stuff. And what I say to them is, who you know will never get you a job, but it might get you an interview. And when you're in the industry and you're working in the industry, it's never going to get you a contract, and who you know is not going to get you a donation, but it'll get you in front of somebody to then make your case. Nobody contributes to the Christian Service Center because Eric Gray works here. But they visited the Christian Service Center because I work here, and by showing them the work that we're doing, then they were convinced that, yes, I'm going to write a check for $1,000 to support your cause. And I think that only becomes easier the more you are collaborating and partnering with other organizations, because you learn from what they're doing. Just in the 4 months that we've been hosting multiple other agencies here, we have learned so much from them that our 44-year-old daily hot lunch program that we've been doing, we're going to change the whole thing because we've seen other organizations that have only been doing it for 3 years, they do it better than we do. And we're like, this is great. Let's just collaborate and find new ways to do this type of work. There's no reason to do this by yourself. But collaboration in our world in social services takes on a very real tone when you're using this database program that we have called the Homeless Management Information System. So if somebody comes to my door, like Kenny, who we saw earlier, and we enter in information about Kenny here, and then he goes across the street to the coalition, they're going to see that same information. They're not going to duplicate services, and more importantly, they're going to complement the work that we did by just continuing down that process. So we literally put together a plan of action, and we know that we may not be the only ones that are able to enact that plan of action with Kenny. Somebody else might be able to do that. And because of that, and Kenny's a perfect example, Kenny has been out on the streets for years, but because we've had multiple different agencies all working together in partnership and then we're all seeing him, we've now put in a more concerted effort to say, we are going to get Kenny into housing, and day after tomorrow, he's moving into his first apartment in more than a decade. And so I think collaboration isn't a nicety, it's a necessity. You have to do it. Otherwise, you're really just wasting your time.
And I think from just perusing the grounds before we even started the interview, was something as the nonprofit organization which focuses on providing showers to folks that can only do that once or twice a week. It just sort of spells as to how it's so difficult to provide all of the services in one facility that an individual needs when they're in a destitute type situation.
Yeah.
So I think collaborative partnerships is probably the only way to attack this singular problem of homelessness, poverty.
Right. And from a very practical standpoint, the organization you're talking about, it's called Service and Love Together, SALT. They actually have raised money to retrofit a trailer with 4 shower units in it, and they provide showers for unsheltered adults. I want to do that. I aspire to do that as an organization, and eventually I will probably do that as an organization here, but it's going to take me years to develop the resources to sustain that, to do it as often as they're doing that 4 days a week here, and they're seeing over 250 people every single week that they're providing showers. I can't do that today. I could do it maybe 3 years from now, But why wait 3 years from now when there's a group down the street that's already doing it that needs a place to go,
Right.
and they can just come on our property and do it here? And I think the reason we don't do that as nonprofits oftentimes is because we think, well, I can't raise money around it if I'm not doing it. Well, that may be true, but who cares? If you can raise the money you need to operate, then you're just do that. You don't need to worry about, oh, well, what is the long-term implication if I offer this service or they offer this service? If it's providing service, people get it, and they're going to support you. And in this case, if they want to give to SALT as opposed to giving to my organization, by all means, go and do it. I don't need everybody in the world to contribute to the Christian Service Center. I need to raise about $1.2 million a year. I get about 900 people who do that every single year. I get 901, I'm golden. That's all I need to do. I don't need 1.8 million, Central Floridians to donate to the organization. I just need 901. And if I can get 901, and next year get 902, we're off to the races and we're able to provide more service and do it better. And if some of those people give to SALT and don't give to me, that's great. I'm totally happy to do it because they're providing service better and faster than I ever could, at least not for the next 3 to 5 years before. And what they'll do, because it's mobile unit, they're going to help us establish that same program in a more permanent way, and they're going to go do it in another part of the community better, and then they're going to establish that group, and then they're going to go somewhere else. And that whole idea of mobile service to sort of pilot something, I think it's genius. And it's one of those things where I see it and I think, God, I wish I'd thought of that 10 years ago, because it's just genius. It's brilliant. It's a brilliant strategy.
So the need is ever pressing, particularly with everything that's going on right now. So I caught an excerpt of an interview that you did, I think maybe earlier last year. I don't remember the news media outlet, but you were going over some of the things that you explained with United Against Poverty and their member share grocery program, and talking about the classification process and who classifies, who doesn't, 200th percentile or below the poverty line U.S. But it was the last statement that really stayed with me, which, did I read that correctly? Where you mentioned that I think it was 46% of the Orlando community falls within that category. Now I know in a previous question you highlighted some of those things as to the why.
Yeah.
But if there's anything else that you can possibly add, even before the pandemic, these were the stats.
Yeah.
This is a problem.
Yeah, I mean, you have in Orlando, 46% of the community is earning at 200% of the U.S. poverty or below. And what that basically means is if you are a single individual earning about $24,000 a year or less, no dependents, you are at 200% of U.S. poverty rate. And that 200% of U.S. poverty rate is an important distinction because there are no government benefits like SNAP, food stamps, Medicaid. There's nothing that's available to anybody who's earning above that.
Just a little bit over.
Right. So if you are earning at 135% of the U.S. poverty level, so just a third above the poverty level, then you qualify for Medicaid as a child in the state of Florida. But an adult doesn't qualify for Medicaid until they are below the U.S. poverty level by another third, but 65%. So the spectrum of the poverty level is 0 to 200% is really important for people to understand, because all benefits and government services are available to people only within that spectrum. So the poverty level was developed in 1963 by an Eastern European immigrant named Molly Orshansky, and she was a White House employee who had been asked to develop a poor line. That's what they called it at the time. So what is the line in the U.S. in which you're considered poor? And so at the time, it was developed based on what for her had been the most expensive part of her household daily budget growing up in Poland, which was the cost of milk. And so for decades, really until the late 1980s, the United States poverty rate was directly tied to the price of milk in the United States. It wasn't until the Clinton administration when they started to make more robust changes to that, and it was a little bit more of a comprehensive measure. But even to this day, the poverty line is really a difficult thing to follow because it changes based on the number of people in your family. So if you're a single individual earning $12,000 a year or less, you're considered in poverty. If you're a single individual with one dependent, one child, or even another adult, then that number goes to $16,000. So you add another $4,000 to each time. Now, it's not exactly that number. It's slightly, but I'm kind of making it simpler. And so if you're the average household size in our community, 3 people, earning $20,000 a year or less in your household income, you're in poverty. In this community, we have 46% of the people earning double that, but more to the point, 1 in 3 wage earners in this community are earning $25,000 a year or less. So a third of our wage earners are earning what would be considered impoverished wages, even though the rate of poverty in Orlando is about 16% overall for the 3-county area. It is a huge percentage of people when you consider that we're in a community really of 2.5 million across a 3 or 4 county area, depending on who you look at. So it is it's a significant issue, but this type of problem exists in multiple communities all over the United States. It's not unique to Orlando. What makes Orlando unique is that 200% U.S. poverty threshold. The idea that almost half your community is would consider it at the working poor rate, which is 200% U.S. poverty, that is just unconscionable. And so, people think, well, people who have means, they think, oh, it's somebody else, and it's not that big a problem. It's half the community you're talking about.
That's what's unbelievable.
And so,
it's staggering.
How do you frame the size and scope of a problem like that? It's really difficult. I try all kinds of analogies to try to express to people how big a deal this particular problem is. But I don't think until you get off the interstate highway and drive through some of these neighborhoods that you really understand the level of poverty that's really going on throughout all of Central Florida. It's truly staggering. You can't imagine it until you actually see it up close and personal.
And there lies the need for nonprofit organizations to sort of fill the gap, or try to.
Yeah, I think nonprofits are, we are filling the gap. Unfortunately, I think, the size and scope of these problems really requires governmental intervention and policy change at a much higher level, which is why I think it's important for nonprofits to be advocates for this and talk about these things. It's one of the reasons I try to educate myself on this, is because there's not that many other people out there talking about it. And so, we look for solutions, not just problems. To me, if I had to pick one thing that I would solve in this community right now, it would be public transportation funding. I think it is the silver bullet in terms of solving a lot of other issues. But unfortunately, that's because Orlando has the worst funded public transportation system in the United States. But if you could provide more dedicated funding and provide more buses and more drivers, you're going to get more people to their jobs. You're going to take the burden of cost off of them in a really significant way. Because right now, the point-to-point time for travel on Lynx buses is 2.5 hours on average. Right. And for a lot of times, you can't get to places because the buses don't run 24 hours a day. And there's a lot of second and third shift workers in this community on tourist-based jobs. And so the public transportation system in this community it's not that it's broken, it's just way too small, way too small. And I think a lot of people in this community, especially old Orlando residents, still think that this is a sleepy little town. But the analogy I use for trying to pull them out of that psychological misnomer is that we had over 75 million visitors in 2019 to this community. We're the #1 tourist destination in the known universe. Number 2 is New York with just under 60 million visitors. But number 3 was Paris, France with 24 million visitors. So we have 3 times as many people visiting us as Paris, France, which is number 3 on the list, which means we are no longer a sleepy little town. This is a major mecca for all kinds of people and industry. It's one of the most diverse communities on the planet. And I think the idea that we don't deserve a robust public transportation system that is going to have to be funded with some type of tax dollars is just ludicrous. And people who are thinking that they don't have to fund that are completely out of their minds, oblivious to the problems that are surrounding them. And I think the most important aspect that is a sales point for this is the number of small business owners that struggle to hire people because they can only hire in a small radius of the people who are able to get to them. And if we were able to expand that radius, it makes it a more competitive work environment, job market. I think it is truly one of those rising tides raise all ships type of philosophies. And if all problems were so simple that you could throw money at them and fix them, God, wouldn't this be a great place to be? This is one of those problems. You throw $67 million a year at it, we have a slightly above average public transportation system compared to most communities in the nation. And if you need a better statistic for it, Walt Disney World, God love them, they're doing great work, has more buses than the entire Lynx system. And that is an imbalance that has to be corrected. Disney is not doing anything wrong. They're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. God love, and that is a great business model, and truly one for the ages. And we exist in that community with them, and we have to find ways to compete compared to other sister communities around the United States. And right now, we are not competitive at that level, not with public transportation.
Yeah, that's a very, very great point that you bring up, and I'm very much an advocate of what you're, just living here for as long as I have. Even as a student earning student wages, it never even occurred to me to try to be dependent to make it to a class on time as a commuter, as I was, using the public transportation system, because if it's bad now, it was probably near non-existent then.
Yeah.
So tremendous point that you bring up. As we continue with some of our remaining questions. This one, I know obviously when you're working in the nonprofit sector, it's not for self-aggrandizement. I understand that. But as we say that you have been recognized for your work in the Orlando community, with the Orlando Business Journal last year, Orlando CEO of the Year, just as recently as last year. Can you share with us a little bit about what that means to you in terms of, is it a sense of validation for the work that you've done? I know that I'm doing, the best work that I can offer. Just share some thoughts on that.
It is nice to be recognized. I'm not above it. I think the little bit of recognition I've been able to get, I hopefully have been able to turn into advocacy for the people that we serve. That's my hope. I don't know how much of a voice I really have in the community. I don't think anybody really knows until long after they're gone. I hope that I'm able to use what little bit of voice I do have to kind of move the ball down the field on community improvement in some small way. Whether I do or not, I don't really know. I mean, other people would have to judge that. I think I could probably do a much better job of being an advocate, and that would require me doing a lot more reading and really just building up my knowledge base so I can talk more intelligently about the things that I'm passionate about. But there's only so much time in the day. I think I'm pretty sensitive to any recognition that's thrown my way, in part because I don't do this by myself. And I know that sounds like the nice, humble thing to say, but it's really true. There are so many other people that work in this world with me, and I really would love to be able to find ways to recognize them more often. When we were talking earlier, I pointed out one of my staff who was walking by, Carla Cox. She's going to be running an organization better and more effective than this one day, very, very soon. Brian Hampton, who came in here earlier and was talking with us, he's a brilliant development professional that's going to end up, working for an agency much larger than this one day. Our board chairman, Mike Beal, who's just coming out of his board service, really could be doing a lot of other better things with his time. He's a brilliant local property expert. He runs a property management organization called Bishop Beal, and the guy's brilliant. And I think, God, I'm like lucky to be in the room with him, but I end up being the one that gets all the recognition. I also get all the blame when things go wrong, so there is a little bit of a trade-off there, but I'm okay with that. And I think people who shy away from having this level of responsibility, I think they're crazy. I love being responsible for this stuff, because it also means I have the authority to advance it to where it needs to be. This organization is my first job where I report directly to the board of directors. Every other place I've worked, I had a person I reported to who reported to the board of directors. And so in many ways, this is sort of my first executive director role, even though I've been in the industry for 25 years. And I feel very fortunate to have it, because there's not that many jobs like this available in the world. There always seems to be, like, there's dozens of nonprofits out there and such, but many of them are very, very tiny, and the turnover or failure rate of nonprofits is worse than restaurants. I think most people would be surprised that there are well over 7,000 nonprofits in Central Florida. Most of them you will never, ever hear of. But they oftentimes are just individuals who wanted to start something new and had a really good intention and filed nonprofit status, and then it never really went anywhere. Commendation to you for being able to take something now for multiple years and say, hey, we're going to stick with this. It's very, very, very hard to do that.
It is.
I've never had the ambition to start a nonprofit. It's never something that's popped in my mind where, I want to found this, I want to get this off the ground. I don't think I have an entrepreneurial brain. It's just not my style. But I do like being able to take organizations and look at the resources they have and the structure and the history and see how can we take them to the next level.
Right.
You would clean up this and we'll improve that, and we'll use this tradition and we'll use that history, and we'll kind of continue to advance them along the way. This organization is replete with that. I mean, all kinds of history. And I got to come into this organization, instead of finding a lot of problems that you had to fix, there's all these little hidden gems. Most notably, as an example, the previous executive director, Robert Stewart, had started an endowment here back in 1997, and that was, I think, his second year here on the job. And he did it with a community foundation by investing $10,000 into a fund that was now grown over the years into where we have a lot more money in that endowed account. But you couldn't start an endowment through the community foundation here in Central Florida. It's called the Central Florida Foundation. You couldn't start it for less than $100,000 now. And so that type of vision that he had 25 years ago has benefited me greatly, because I don't have to repeat any of this. And of all the organizations I've ever worked for, this is the very first one that already had an established endowment before I started. And I've worked for pretty big organizations like the American Lung Association and public broadcasting, Catholic Health Initiatives, Give Kids the World. Now, many of these organizations have those types of structures now, but this one has been doing really smart work for 49 years. And so I get to be the beneficiary of all of that. But at the same time, I think there is a lot more that we can still do. We have all this potential to grow. I've got this 2-acre property with 30,000 square feet that we get to play with, and this wonderful staff that has been here for years and years. I have 4 staff members who've been here for more than 20 years.
Outstanding.
I don't know anywhere else like that. So we get to play with a lot of those toys and be able to use them to our advantage. And hopefully we do right by all the people who came before me, because otherwise I've blown it. And I don't want that to be the case. That scares me. And so, I'm hoping that the recognition that I achieve, going forward, is really the people that I've got to teach along the lines that go on to run their own nonprofits and become maybe not executive directors, although that'd be great, but also board chairs and committee chairs and maybe founders of nonprofits. That to me would be like the ultimate recognition, because I think the most significant thing I've been able to do is work with all these other people. There's only so much impact I'm able to make by myself. But if I can get other people inspired to do something on their own, then that has a phenomenally greater impact over time. And that's probably the thing that I'm most proud of, is just the idea of being able to touch all these other lives. Not the people that we've helped directly, but the people I've been able to teach that hopefully will go and help other people.
There's a lasting impact and legacy associated to that.
I hope.
Yeah.
Time will tell.
Positive one.
We'll see.
I'm sure it will be.
Yeah.
So as we come to our closing question, and it's I guess a 2-part question. What is next for you individually, for Mr. Gray individually, personally? Anything that you want to share with us? And professionally with the Christian Service Center, what are some aspiring goals that you have for the organization? And lastly, since this is a series on servanthood, and you are now, I believe, your 2nd or 3rd interview in that series, soon to be released, 2021. Please tune in for all these beautiful interviews. What does servanthood mean to you?
So next for us, we're trying to turn the Christian Service Center into what's called a comprehensive day services centered for unsheltered adults. And in the kind of the structure of homeless services work in the United States, the communities that are doing this really well have kind of a 3-legged stool approach. They have a great shelter system, which this community we do, a great coordinating system where you coordinate through the database system and federal funding. And in this community, we have that as well. It's called the Homeless Services Network. It's run by a brilliant woman named Martha R. And then the 3rd leg of that stool that we haven't had as robustly is a comprehensive day services center where homeless adults can go during the day to get services and interact and build relationships with case managers such that they get out of that system. And so Orlando has had pieces and parts of that over the years, and lots of agencies have done really well with pieces and parts. What we're trying to do is bring all that into one place, and we're doing that with all these partnerships. And hopefully, I think we're doing it now in some ways. It's a little rough, but I think within a year from now, I think you will see this as a real jewel in the crown of the city's effort to effectively end homelessness. And that's a true goal in this community. We want to get to what's called functional zero. So for as many people who become homeless in a given year, that same number of people or better are being housed. And communities in like Hackensack, New Jersey and Salt Lake City have done that. And that's what we aspire to, is we want to get to functional zero. And we are only one cog in that machinery, but I feel like it's an important cog, and I want to make it run really, really well. And I think from the standpoint of servanthood, that's what we're trying to do. We want to be good servants, not only to the population of homeless adults in this community, and we also want to be good servants to all of the people who've come before me, the hundreds of board members, dozens of staff members, thousands of volunteers that have over the years worked on this agency's path. I feel like I'm in service to their legacy as well. I take that very seriously. It's hard not to. You have a lot of pictures and storybooks around here to follow all of that. And I think most importantly, the community as a whole, the city of Orlando, the metropolitan area of Orlando, the 2.5 million residents that work here. I think if we can help eliminate homelessness, as I've said a couple times, I really feel like that is the best thing this agency can do to kind of raise the tide for the whole community. And it's a big lift. To some people, it may seem like a small aspect of what we're trying to do in the community, but it's our little corner of the world. That's what we're trying to find. How can we end homelessness in this community? Here. And I think that's our best way of being of service. Our goal is to not necessarily take credit for ending homelessness. That's a team effort here. But if there's one thing that we really want to plant our flag on, is we want to talk about Christian service, and we want to inspire more in the way of Christian service, whether that is service by feeding others or volunteering, or that might be service in the military, it might be service at a school, it might be at your PTA, it might be service to your family, it might be service directly to your faith. But the idea of service as a core concept is really fundamental to this organization, and I think that's where we want to live. We want to really focus and drill down on that. We're not there yet. We've done a couple of our own podcasts and things, just talking to people. What does Christian service mean to you? Short segments. Right. But that's the world we want to exist in as best we can. Is really focusing on Christian service and trying to elevate Christian service in this community, some way, shape, or form. I'll let you know if we ever get there.
Well, thank you so much for this time and all of this great information that you've provided to us about the Christian Service Center. Thank you for your service individually. Thank you to your staff as well for all the great work that they're doing on an everyday basis. And as somebody that's been living in the city for 24 years, the travesty is that we hadn't met sooner, but it's just really exciting to me to hear the things that you guys have going on right now, especially in the times that we find ourselves in when there's just a lot of need, and it seems like it's pressing ever more with every passing day, almost. So thank you so much for taking this time, and I really look forward for us to syncing together again in the future as things begin to normalize, hopefully latter part of next year, and a lot of these aspirational goals take root.
Yeah, God willing. Yeah, there's a lot that still needs to happen in order to get us out of this problem area that we're in right now. But thank you for your program, and good luck with all the work you're doing. I think it's awesome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, Mr. Gregg. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to another segment of Inspire Movement. We had a wonderful conversation with Mr. Eric Gray of the Christian Service Center. Incredibly informative, and I'm sure that you're going to enjoy it. Please tune in into our other social media platforms. Every week, we're giving you new content on Instagram, Facebook, and again, if you've not subscribed already to our YouTube channel, please do so. And also be on the lookout for our website, inspiremovement.com. We're soon going to have a shopping feature for you with some fitness apparel that we definitely want you to check out and start ordering if at all possible. But thank you so much again for tuning in with us. We're going to continue doing these community outreach interviews with community leaders, which I know that you're going to enjoy, folks that are doing good work for good reasons, and we need to get the word out. Thank you so much again, and I look forward to seeing you guys again.
help because I got out of prison and it's like they put me on the streets with nothing, you know, and I had this to come to, and it's really helping me out a lot. I'm out looking for jobs, you know, and I got places they can call back to, you know, and I got address now. You know, when you're homeless, you don't have them things, you know, and that's a big help for us, you know, a big help. So, you know, so many times we out here and people shun away from us, but we can come out here and they give us food, hygiene, clothing. We can get showers, and most of all, we get love from them, you know. They give us a lot of love, and it's something that we miss on the streets, you know. And the organization itself is God sent, and they bring in good people, you know. I mean, nobody's mean to us, you know. Everybody's helpful, and I mean, we just love it here, you know. I mean, they even give us incentives to get off the streets, you know, because before, you know, we were down and out. But now, you know, you can walk around, you clean, you got clean clothes on that they donate to us, you know, and make you want to get a job, you know, and do things for yourself. And before then, you know, it was like you was just in a rut. You didn't have nowhere. Like they gave us a place where we can have a callback number, we have a address, you know, so when you fill out an application, you have all them things, you know. Before we didn't have that. We didn't have a phone for them to call back and say we got the job or not, you know, and it was like you was in a no-win situation. But now it's looking up for us where we can win, you know, so we can get jobs and come off these streets, the ones that want to, you know. And it's a big help, you know, it's a really big help to us. It's a good organization, and I hope it stays around. You know, we really need it out here. We really need it. I mean, it's working for us. You know, sometimes a lot of organizations, they, you know, they ain't it for them, you know, but this organization shows that it's about us, you know.